Good afternoon and welcome back to Peterborough Men's Mental Health Day. For those of you who've just joined us, this is the second panel discussion of this afternoon. This morning we covered topics with a range of speakers. We had Gary, who's joining us again now, helping us understand what mental health really is. And we also looked at the trends in masculinity, vulnerability, well-being and lifestyle and how these link to mental health. This afternoon, we're focusing on what we can do here in Peterborough to improve the support network for mental health, especially for men. And I'm joined now by a wonderful selection of people whose work includes mental health and who are active in and around Peterborough. So I'll introduce you to them briefly. We have Gary Johannes from Mental Health in the Workplace. Hi, Gary.
Hi.
Gary is a founder of Mental Health in the Workplace, and the organisation trains other businesses on how to understand mental health, including mental health first aid training. We have Judith Devlin, who is Senior Safety Advisor from Morgan Sindall. Morgan Sindall is a construction and infrastructure firm. They were awarded a Gold Award from mental health charity Mind for their Workplace Wellbeing Index. So they've done some excellent work at focusing their attention on mental health as well as safety in the construction industry. We have Dr. Tony Woolfson, who is a consultant physician and leadership coach for the NHS. So as well as being a sort of NHS doctor for many years, he is also a leadership coach. And what I found particularly interesting when I met him I was a patient in the NHS, is his range of different interests and skills, including breath work and communication and leadership skills. Finally, we have Andy Burley, who is co-founder, hi Andy, of Boxing Futures. And Boxing Futures is a charity that promotes physical and mental health of disadvantaged young people. So they have lots of different schemes. One of them is called Brothers Through Boxing, which helps young males to increase their social connections and feel less lonely and isolated. Good. So if we could just start off with a couple of you explaining how mental health became part of your work. So maybe Judith, because you've been a health and safety advisor at Morgan Sindall for many years. How did mental health specifically?
So previous to my current role, I was a training manager within Morgan Sindall, and I was asked to go back into health and safety, which I'd done in other companies. And when I was asked, I said to my then MD, I'll do it, but only if I can concentrate on health. And I gave him some statistics in the construction industry. So on average, we kill about 40 people a year in the construction industry through safety-related incidents. However, there's almost 400 people take their own lives every year in the construction industry, and there's many thousands more die through physical ill health. He was blown away by the statistics and said that yes, by all means, we could go away and do stuff. And we decided then to take a bigger action on mental health. And I was lucky enough to then work my way up and become a mental health first aid instructor through Mental Health First Aid England. And we've done lots of campaigns, lots of schemes, and lots of training around mental health, just to try and break down that stigma that there seems to be in the industry, because we need to do something to get these figures down. They're far too high. We concentrate a lot on safety, and on, quite rightly, on those 40 people who don't go home safe every day. But we need to do something more for those 400 people who feel that they can't talk to anybody and they take their own lives. It's just become a really important thing for our industry and something we need to concentrate on. And I have to say, in general, the construction industry is stepping up to the mark. There's a lot of good work going out there across the industry, and hopefully I can share some of it today with you and tell you some of the good things that are going on, not just in Morgan Sindall, but across the industry that I'm aware of.
Fantastic. Yeah, we want to hear as many examples of best practice in other businesses as well and other organisations. Great. I'm going to pick one more person just to sort of explain how they got involved in this type of work. Andy, how did you end up working for Boxing Futures, and was sort of mental health or men's mental health always an interest of yours?
Well, my background is substance misuse recovery as a recovery worker manager in the NHS and criminal justice. So it's obviously a crossover with mental health, substance misuse, and working with young offenders and young people. So it was from a meeting that myself and the founder, Anthony, we met, we discussed that there is a gap, that people are being let go, being dropped off, not being supported. So we thought that we'd come up with something and fill that gap. And that's when Boxing Futures was born, basically. And that's how we came to deliver the service now of what we're delivering now for the last 7-8 years.
Wow, 7-8 years. Yeah, and it's those gaps, isn't it? That spotting those gaps and different groups of people that are getting missed out, that is really important.
Yeah, and we found that it was the young people in that age range, once they hit 18 and they're deemed as no longer eligible for care from social services or the care system, they get dropped off. And that's where that gap was. So that's where we kind of aimed. But then we went into younger people at 13-year-olds and started supporting from 13, so we can pick them up at an early age and carry on that support, because when they've completed the program with us, they're not just dropped off, they continue on. So it's about picking them up early and giving them the correct support, guidance, and then working with them.
That's amazing that you're catching it early, because you do hear so many times that it's when young people, especially men, they're going out into the big wide world, leaving that familiar structure of school or their household, and then kind of thrown in at the deep end, and that can be, too much for some people. So
yeah. And it's breaking down at that young age, having to be the big macho young person or the adult or the teenager. So it's letting them know that they don't have to have that persona all the while. They can be the person they are instead of hiding.
Yeah. So, any other comments on what we've heard so far?
No, it's just really impressive that there's so much happening. It just needs to be a little bit more broadcast, like we're talking now.
Yeah. So Gary, you've been working in this field for a long time.
Yeah.
How have you seen views change about mental health? We heard Judith sort of saying that the stigma and we're aiming to normalise the conversation. Would you say that's happening in recent years, and what do you predict is going to happen over the years ahead?
So it's a hard one, and I wear a couple of hats. So I train therapists, and I am a therapist, but also I train into organisations. And it's interesting, you've got those organisations who have quickly got it, understood it, and see the value, and actually care. And like Judith was saying, they've taken a massive movement towards it. And then we talk to other companies who have definitely got major issues, and they'll go, well, it's not our problem. So there's a definite split, and I think the majority of people haven't taken it on board, and some will just tick box. They'll do mental health first aid training and go, oh, look, we've got these certificates, but the organisation isn't fully seeing the value of it. But actually, I think with the more pressure from organisations like Judith's, where they're showing and leading the way, and they're getting acclaim, other companies will start saying, actually, there's some value to the organisation here, because they don't always measure it in human lives, they measure it in bottom line. So, you'll find, and one of the things I know is from Deloitte did a report that every pound you spend on mental health training, you'll get a tenfold return on your bottom line. But most companies are looking at the cost of training and the cost of adapting and culture rather than the profit. So sometimes we need to come in from a very financial point of view rather than a people point of view, which is still a shame. But it's once they start seeing it. But I think it's still a slow story, in my opinion. I think I was talking to you the other day, and I think the conversation has started, but we're only talking about having a conversation. We're still talking about the conversation rather than actually getting into the nitty gritty. People like Andy and his team are actually getting into it. But most organisations are still only having a conversation about the conversation needs to be had. But that's changing. But there's still a lot of work to do about changing the culture of particularly men's mental health. It's seen as a a real no-go area, and I deal with that every day, and it's something I'm very passionate about as men's mental health.
Absolutely. Yeah, Gary has done a lot of work fundraising for the men's mental health charity CALM, which is for campaign against living miserably.
Yeah.
Really great work.
Absolutely.
Tony, so bearing in mind what Gary has just said about, some organisations being really receptive, others not necessarily so, your role as a kind of working at the level of leadership and management and decision making to coach people there, and your interest in overall sort of health, but also quality of communication. What do you see as the most important thing that leaders or decision makers can do on this topic?
Well, within the areas I work, I think the biggest challenge is getting people to engage, and I'm sure that's not anything unusual. But actually, the local trust has been really very good at putting a lot of stuff in place, particularly around the COVID issues, which we've been struggling with recently. And what struck me particularly is the incredibly low uptake of people are just not coming forward. And I think our main challenge is to make it easier and more attractive for people to come forward and get engaged in a health bringing process. I'm sure that's not unique to the NHS. I can imagine that the construction industry has a culture that's not that dissimilar, actually. And I work, well, I've been involved with initiatives in the trust for all staff, not just doctors, although I generally do my coaching work with doctors. But we've put out all sorts of offers, both within and outside the NHS, and I've been horrified how low the uptake has been. So I think that's a big task for us all to make ourselves more approachable, to make it more attractive for people to come to us.
Is that then, is it because people feel they don't have the time? Are they, overly pressured, short time poor at work, so that this feels like another duty, an onerous duty to get involved in? What do you think is the reason for not coming forward?
The short answer is I haven't the faintest idea. Yeah.
I was just going to mention something on leadership that has been very beneficial within our division of Morgan Sindall. I work in the rail division, and what prompted a lot of people to speak up originally was one of our senior members, one of our senior team. We do road shows regularly. We go around and tell how the business is going and what's happening and everything. And he talked about his struggles with mental ill health. And actually it prompted people just to come forward because they saw senior people saying it. They actually thought, well, it's okay for me to say it now. And that was a big benefit. And it's something I'm trying to push a bit more, is to get more of the senior team just to put their hands up and say, actually, this is an issue for me as well. And I think that's quite beneficial.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. The companies what are doing really well. So we're working with Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council, and they've got a whole culture change based on mental health. And we started with the CEO and the senior management team, the senior directorship team, who did the training first, but openly promoted it throughout everybody. Everybody knew they were doing mental health training, awareness training. It wasn't the first aid stuff, which is just about helping people if they fall over. It's very good, but it's all post-problem. It was awareness training and understanding mental health. But the leadership team were very open about their situations and where they'd been and how they'd coped and what the training had done for them. We're now doing it across the board for the whole of the staff at the county council and the city council, and every single session is fully booked. We're oversubscribed, and it's voluntary. Yes, they do it in their work time, so they're not having to do overtime or their own time, but every single session is booked. We're doing it online at the moment. But then we go back into, when we're allowed to go back into, but all the time, every one of them's completely booked. And I think if we'd done that in reverse, where we just said, we've come up with this training, you should go on it, we wouldn't have had the return. But the leadership team leading the mental health conversation changed everything.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with Judith.
So it's the leaders expressing that it's okay not to be okay themselves. It's okay to be.
I think it builds trust, because one of the things I hear quite often from employees is, if I admit I've got a mental health issue, my career will now be stalled. So I don't know if that happens in the medical industry, where if you've got a doctor who then has a breakdown, then they'll never make it to consultant, because it'll be, HR will tell you it never happens, but the employees doesn't believe it. But if the top person's saying, well, I've got here, but this is my history, and I'll go, oh, right, so I'm allowed to be here. So I think there's a story in the fact that the trust will be gained if everybody's open and honest.
Yeah.
Andy, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, we actually approached some of the big organisation companies in the city to offer mental health wellbeing days, where they come to us, we set up a boxing ring, we have a bit of fun, no contact, but like a fitness day where people can come and do activities with us. And we never had one organisation take us up. None of them was interested. We just said
Judith
to them,
wants some.
Yeah. I'll tie in with you after this, Andy, and get something organised.
Make us a small donation, because we're a charity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we will.
I'll donate.
We will put a day on. We can do an 8-hour day where we can do stuff to help and talk, because all of our staff are mental health trained and fitness and different activities. And I obviously have a lot to do with the prison service as well with my job. And that has probably got one of the biggest, highest rates of suicide and mental health amongst the staff. And that's a massive area that we need to kind of help as well as construction. And
I think every industry, I've worked with prison officers on a one-to-one basis, and it's like, I'm not allowed to report who it is, or I don't talk to the prison service, but they've come to me privately, even though they've got a scheme what they can go to within their organisation, but they don't want to be seen to take up the scheme within the organisation, because that might report back. So they come to me privately. But you're right, I've seen quite a number of prison officers from Peterborough and March and all around, but they don't want to go within their own organisation, because their own organisation isn't coming to people like you and going, we've got the open dialogue going.
I think that's an important point, Gary. I think it's a big thing about the fear factor. There's the fear of speaking up in case it affects your job or people look differently at you. And it is about it's encouraging people that actually it's not going to affect them, and just helping them to understand. What
Gary mentioned earlier, if you can't get past the MDs and directors, you can't get to the frontline staff or the people that are suffering, because if they don't acknowledge there is a problem in that workplace, they're never going to, the staff are not getting that support.
Yeah.
You've got to get the member of that board who's really bought into it personally.
Yes.
They might move it forward. And if you can't get that one person, then it's not going to be sold, and it becomes a monetary thing then. How much does training cost? How much is this? And how many days out? We can only, I've talked to a global business recently who said we'll only give them 2 hours, full stop, not a week or not a month, but 2 hours full stop, to do full mental health training. Now, I wouldn't do that in less than a day, and that's only the starter. But they'll get 2 hours, that's it. And this is an international global company who can't release their staff, and they have a terrible, terrible record with mental health and suicide. But they're counting it as money, not lives, and they're not recognising the fact that if they invest in their people and they invest in their mental health, the amount of sick days will come down to about 90% recovery from sick days.
Yeah.
How much would that make to their business? They get such a return.
Yeah.
And you would have seen that, Judith, within your organisation, the amount of reduced absenteeism. And the biggest thing we see in organisation isn't absenteeism. People measure that, and because it's very measurable, you're not there, we can measure it. Presenteeism, and you see this, Tony, within the hospitals. How many people are on duty, but not really there, not being productive, not being the best version of themselves, not being, and we see that all the time, but you can't measure that. It's an invisible cost. So if you can,
well, one of my main sources of information actually is Twitter.
yes.
Okay.
There's a lot of activity on Twitter, and I've seen a lot of distress and discussion and so on going on the Twitter platforms that I'm involved with. But what does occur to me is that there's just something about the words mental health that puts people off.
Yes.
And can we find another name for it?
It's interesting because in our training, and I'm thinking mental health first aid, which I deliver as a trainer too, we talk about what mental health really means, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. You know, what was the talk I do, and a talk I did this morning, is about what it really means, because mental health is like physical health. If you say, I've got physical health, it doesn't mean it's good or bad. It means you've got health, and you can decide whether you're feeling well or you're feeling poorly. So mental health is just a title of how your brain is and how that's affecting your body. It doesn't mean it's good or bad.
Sure.
But people hear mental health.
Can you persuade people of that?
It's education, and the big thing I'm about is education.
Absolutely.
You know, I was doing training yesterday, and if you ask the average person, if you hear the term mental health, what do you think? And always they'll say something negative. And actually, it doesn't mean anything. It just is a status. It's a, you know, and you can have good mental health, you can have bad mental health. It doesn't mean anything. It's what you then add to it. And most people hear mental health and they go, that's a problem. Well, actually, if you hear physical health, you don't think problem. If you say to a boxer, you know, how's your health? They don't go, you're all, you know, because you've mentioned health, you're obviously not fit enough to box. So it's one of the big challenges about education. And for me, education. And we're not explaining to people what it means. We're only talking to people about what happens after you've got a mental illness. Nobody talks about how you don't get a mental illness. And that's where I sit in the prevention, how to stop yourself getting a mental illness and how to take responsibility for your own mental health. And everybody thinks it's the NHS's problem.
No.
I think that's a really interesting point, Gary, and especially for a lot of companies, they're looking at that end point where they're training mental health first aiders or they're doing whatever. But actually, they need to take it back to the very basics, do a risk assessment, look and see where your problems are, try and fix, do the preventative measures.
Absolutely.
And I know the HSE are pushing it a bit more in looking at the stress things and the HSE stress indicator and everything. We actually do a yearly survey on stress, and that forms our risk assessment then on stress and mental health for the rest of the year. And I think more companies need to take it back to that early stage and start looking earlier and doing, like you say, the awareness training. We've decided that every line manager in our business will have to go through an awareness session on mental health. And we also do a shorter kind of toolbox talk for everybody else who works in the business. So we kind of got that tiered approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love mental health first aid. I deliver the training, but actually, I want to get the industry to a point where there's no need for mental health first aid. You know, it's putting shutting the gate after the horse is bolted. It's too late. Mental health first aid is actually something which is needed now because we've never put anything in place. I want to get to the point where mental health first aid no longer delivers the course they deliver because they don't need to. And it's now, you know, and, you know, everything. We've got, you know, we do a lot of training on prevention and education and awareness. And I think that's where organisations, and it's about understanding a deeper level of all the niceties and fluffy stuff. I talk about the brain, I talk about neuroscience, I talk about understanding your own behaviours at a neurological level, and that's part of my training. And if you understand that, how much more control do you have over the way you behave and how you can support other people when they're not being in character? You can spot it earlier. So that's what I think is needed, and it sounds like I'm banging a drum, so I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I think we've sort of brought up some really interesting points here, and you know, there's the general stigma which most people are aware of, but also as Tony just pointed out, that the term mental health means so many different things to so many different people, and then often something negative. And if we can get over this idea that you know, if people think that mental health means it's all in their head, that might mean that, you know, it's something they've imagined or it's not real. Whereas actually it's always body wide, because, you know, every time we perceive something, then it's experienced through the body, and vice versa. So it is very real. Can we maybe move on now to sort of the best practice either in your organisation or what you've seen in other organisations as well? So we've talked about the gaps, but there are some shining examples of what works really well. So maybe would anyone like to pick an example of what's worked best for them? Judith, you said you said you knew some others in the industry, maybe outside of Morgan Sindall. Yeah,
so there's various organisations that work with the construction industry. There's Mates in Mind, for example, but Morgan Sindall have signed, well, my section of Morgan Sindall signed up to an organisation called Building Mental Health. I call them an organisation. They don't really exist as an organisation. It's people, like-minded people, who get together to share best practice and share it across the industry and to try and promote mental health in the industry. They have they have guardians, of which I'm one, and the guardians are kind of the people that help steer what we want to do and how we want to promote things. They're partnered with the Lighthouse charity, who support individuals either through mental ill health or physical ill health, or death, unfortunately, the families as well. But what they've done is they've built kind of a framework, and it starts with a 1-hour session that can be delivered to anybody. It's a toolbox talk that's freely available on their website. You can download it, change it, do whatever you want to give out to people, and that kind of gives you a sticker on your hard hat that shows that you get a bronze sticker. You then do a kind of half day or a full day awareness session, which gives you a silver sticker, and your gold sticker is your mental health first aid. So it means on site, when people are walking about, it's either, I mean, I have mine on my phones and on my laptop so that people can see. It's an easily identifiable thing so that you can see what that person understands, and I can go and talk to them.
Wow.
But the nice thing about it as well is, quite often, especially in our industry, we develop training for perhaps behavioural safety. And you do the behavioural safety training at Morgan Sindall, and then you go to another contractor and you have to do their behavioural safety training, and then you have to do somebody else's. This approach means you do one set of training, and it doesn't matter who you work for. Everybody's had the same thing, which I really like. Yeah. And all their materials, they put lots of key reference materials and things, and it's all freely available on their website. Nobody gets charged for it. Anybody can go and use it. All they ask is if you would sign up and sign their charter, which basically says that you're committing to doing something about mental health. You don't even have to do it. They don't mind. You just download the information. So that's some of the really good stuff that's out there just now. And the Lighthouse charity have also developed an app that you have on your phone, and you can check in every day and see how you're feeling. And depending on how you feel, it might point you to some advice or some organisations that you can speak to. I promote it quite heavily to our mental health first aiders, because even if you don't use it for yourself, if you're supporting somebody else and you need to know where to point them in a direction of help, this is excellent, because it's got rafts of information that you can use.
So is that free for anyone to use that app? Completely
free for anyone. I'll get you the details and I'll give you them. Because it's going out, the name of the app's going out of my head right now. But if you Google the Lighthouse Club in the App Store or Play Store or whatever, you would be able to find it, and it can be downloaded and used for anybody. It's a fantastic thing. And it's just all these different things that are just helping promote it in the industry. And we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of companies signed up to Building Mental Health now. They've signed the charter, and this goes from small one-man bands up to big corporate companies like Morgan Sindall, which is.
You share the information with that to me.
I will indeed. I'll send
That'd be good, yes.
And we can share it out. It can be shared to everybody after this. But that's one of my favourite things that I hear about going on at the moment across the industry.
Cool.
Wonderful. So it sounds like there's lots of, there are resources out there, and there's lots of small organisations or, organisations and charities ready to support. Something I know Gary and I touched on the other day. if we were sort of able to link these together better, and the organisations which do have a kind of strong CSR remit, but maybe they don't know how to direct that in the right way. Apart from sort of giving financially, are there other resources you think are needed? Maybe venue space for training, or marketing support, or what else do you think is needed? Gary, you've got something to say, and then maybe Andy.
Something occurred to me since that conversation, and I was talking to a very small business the other day. A lot of very small business owners will not have themselves or 2 or 3, 5 staff. The investment into mental health training is quite expensive. They almost can't do it. And right now in this current culture, the government are giving money for this and money for that and supporting businesses. But actually, as usual, there's no money to support mental health, really. It doesn't really come down to a very small operator who may have suffered with mental health themselves and understands it, but they can't afford necessarily to train their staff in such a way that it's, as Judith just talked. So it's almost like how, if an organisation, a large organisation has a training course on, it's about offering spaces to the smaller organisations, those little micro businesses, and say, we've got the training, we're paying for it, we're doing it anyway, it will cost us really relatively no extra, and actually sponsor spaces for micro business in the area. So the big organisations put training on, and they sponsor spaces for small organisations. It's things like that. Judith.
I had a conversation with my training manager just before I came on the call, and that's something we're willing to offer. If I'm running courses at our Warrington site in Peterborough, if when I'm running courses there, I'll keep at least one space. And I'll offer it out to the community. I'll probably tie in with you, and you can maybe contact people and let them know when we're running courses. And I'll let you know as well, Gary.
Yeah, I was just saying, but it needs to be constructed in a way like we was talking earlier about. There's, we've got links of this, that, and the other. Yep. So if we said, who wants it? But actually, if those organisations, those little companies in Peterborough, put a hand up and said, we're interested, and they almost club together, like you talked about mental health, building mental health. If we had that, a small version of that in Peterborough, a small organisation said we'd like to do more, but we don't know how. Then when organisations such as yours says we've got a free spot, then there's a channel to force it all through and work it through. That's the sort of thing. That whole connectedness between the smaller in Peterborough, small businesses who actually have much more people than the large organisations, and mental health is always directed at the big organisations, never the small organisations, and it's harder for them to get the support, to get the understanding, to get the education. But they've all got families, they've all got friends, they've all got communities, and I think for us that's a really easy place to start to spread the word quicker than trying to get the NHS to get their people to turn up. I think for me that would be where I would look if I had the capacity to do that.
Tony, what would you? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's really valuable. That sizable organisations are up for sponsoring some sponsored places, as it were. But I don't think that the issue is purely financial. Because of the wide network of coaches that I know, we almost all spontaneously offered pro bono work for companies, for individuals. And again, the uptake has been very low, and I don't really quite know why that is. Maybe Gary or Andy have some ideas about that, or Judith, but we were all offering pro bono work, and the only people who've taken that up, in my experience and with the coaches that I know well, are not people who've been particularly distressed, but people who just want some coaching. So, it's a bit of a paradox that the people who may need it aren't coming forward, and that I think is a real issue.
So it's preaching to the converted almost, or that the people who have got an interest, but they're not necessarily the ones who need.
Well, also people are, I don't know how my colleagues here find it, but generally I think people don't necessarily find it that easy to admit to themselves or others that they are distressed.
But that's about creating that conversation, and I think it's about creating the conversation at that grassroots level, so it grows upwards rather than always top down.
Yeah.
Quite often the messaging is top down, and that makes the average person quite skeptical of the messaging. So if we can get it coming up, and it sounds like Judith and their organisations really had it coming from the ground up and from the top down to create that belief system, so they know it's genuine. And humans are very peer led. If you've got your mates doing it, you'll do it. So we need to sort of try and work out. And I don't know the answer completely. I don't know the answer, but how do we get that movement coming upwards? And it turns out Judith's done a lot of it already.
One of the things we found when we first started delivering the training, it was mostly office staff who were coming along and volunteering to be mental health first aiders. And we managed to persuade a couple of the more senior guys at site level, so our works managers and things like that, to come on. And we've seen a big step change. We're getting more people who are at executive level and supervisor level volunteering to come on, because we make it a voluntary course. We don't mandate anybody, because you have to want to do this. And there's more people engaging now and asking to come on it. And I actually had 4 courses booked before COVID came along. I had 40 more people booked to become mental health first aiders. They will be rescheduled, but we've seen a big step change in who wants to come on. And interestingly enough, I did a quick search through the people that I trained. Of the 34 that we've trained in the past 6 months, 22 of them were men, which is a big push and a big good thing, actually, because predominantly it was women that were volunteering first, but we've got way more men coming through and getting trained now, which is great.
I'm currently delivering from Marshals of Cambridge, the aeronautical section, and they've opened it up just for their engineering, the actual sort of engineering side, and every single course has been oversubscribed. They've started a conversation, they've got wellness programs, but they started it a long time ago. So now the mental health first aid trainers come in. I've done 3 or 4 lots of training there, and every single one of them has been oversubscribed from the engineering side, male and female. But the gnarly old engineers are actually getting it. And when you get the open dialogue going, you hear so much, and there's so much heartfelt conversation where they've had friends and colleagues just take their own lives or be really ill, and the engineers are really softening up and realizing actually we need to be really supportive. So it's changing if the organization's already made the decision to change the culture.
Great points. Andy, picking up on what Gary and Judith just said about the need for it to be sort of bottom up and get all different levels involved. With the youngest people you work with, how does the conversation, in what ways are they open and willing to talk about mental health after you've worked with them, or how do they talk about it amongst their peers?
With us, it comes up very early. And we find with the younger people, younger males, that once you get them away from the peers who they're involved with, or what their surroundings, they'll soon open up. They really do start to open up about the feelings of where the lack of, they don't feel like they've got the support, what they gain from being in, having that bit of structure in their life where they feel that they're not the only ones to have them feelings of being low, mental health. And I think it's just the pressure of day to day that they realise that everybody feels the same pressure as what they feel. They're not the only ones to make. So it's just about, we kind of encourage them. And I think once you get them in a common ground, i.e. a boxing gym, a gym, out on the mountain bikes, or doing what we're doing with and what activities, it breaks that barrier down, because then it shows that our staff and coaches are at that level with them. So we're obviously not going down to their level, but we're showing that we got that experience and we can deal and support them and signpost them and then work with them. So that's what we're finding, is getting them barriers If you do it early, you do it the correct way, and you show that it's not nothing to be ashamed of. It's fantastic. It is a good way of getting them in.
Do you have peer leaders?
Yeah, we're setting a mentor scheme up at the moment, because obviously COVID come in and it sort of took it all to bit. It took it away, but we are looking to setting up a new mentor scheme. So we like to encourage our young people to come through our programs and then come back as a volunteer and just keep them progressing through.
That's wonderful.
And we actually approached some other organisations in Peterborough about offering up apprenticeship schemes and we can move them through to work. But again, some of the organisations and businesses take one look at the people we work with and they're not interested. They don't want to know. And that's the thing. They get rejection, and that's the biggest thing for them to take, to be honest.
Yeah.
Even more barriers, isn't it, for them?
Yeah.
That's a fascinating insight. Thanks, Andy. We've got a couple of minutes left. I'd like to just sort of wrap up by asking if there's any mistakes that you've learned from in your work. Would you have done anything differently? And if so, what would that have been around men's mental health or mental health in general? And then if anyone's got any points they'd like to make, is there anything they feel we've missed out in this conversation that we should talk about before we close?
I think one mistake that I certainly used to make was being so enthusiastic about it that it put people off. You've got to, it's really a matter of actually very subtle communication, as I know everybody in this group understands, but it has to be done very gently so that people can allow it to happen rather than force themselves into it. I think that's the key.
We've found that as well. If you pressure people and go in all buzzing and enthusiastic, you kind of scare them off and you don't see them again.
Exactly.
So it's that approach.
Yeah, certainly. So I've been guilty of too, because you just believe in it and you know it works, and you so much want to help people, and sometimes you have to rein yourself back in because people can only actually step up when they're ready.
Yeah,
but it's so hard when you see somebody suffering and you know you've got the answer, just to not, wow, come on, let's do it. But yeah, I think it's a mistake we've all made.
I think sometimes passion can come through in the wrong kind of way because everyone's passionate.
Definitely.
It can come a bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
But what I like about what you're doing, Andy, and you're taking people into a different setting, maybe if they're out mountain biking or in the outdoors, and it's something a little bit where they're not necessarily feel like they have to speak straight away. They're using their body or interacting in a different way, then it takes the pressure off them to speak. Yeah,
we also take them on a 3-day residential down Hindleap Warren, which is down Brighton, where they do caving, rock climbing, out of bounds course, to really take them out of their comfort zones, like high rope climbing up the top of a telegraph pole and jumping on leap of faith. And so we take them to the Peak District. They go walking, mountaineering, bushcraft. So it's everything. So, and this is what we've said, we can offer this to organisations and companies as days out, as like a team building welfare day, to break that stigma down. But not one company in Peterborough took us up on the offer.
Do you get
knocking on your door?
Do you get better take up from other areas?
Cambridge. London we do. Cambridge we do. But with Peterborough, you got like the big organisations: Coca-Cola, Hotpoint, Perkins Engines, Amazon. Do you know what I mean? The only one who supports us in Peterborough was BGL. They're fantastic. What they do.
They're very, very good.
They are amazing, the support. Yeah. But even with Tony, any of the doctors or people staff in the NHS that want to have a welfare day with us, and please give us a shout on something we can definitely put together. And Judith as well.
I definitely want to talk to you after, Andy, because there's there's a lot of crossover. All of us have got a lot of crossover.
Definitely.
Ian's got a very in tune panel here.
Yeah.
You'll probably need to.
Well done, Ian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can cut Ian out now.
But can we arrange to give each other details of all this stuff? It'll come out of the day, and won't
I'm very
it?
happy for Ian to pass my details on to you. I'm on LinkedIn
And mine.
and social
And
media.
likewise.
Great, thank you all.
I'd like to speak to all of you because I think there's a lot of common ground.
Yes,
We support each other for the right cause.
Yeah. Thank you all. That's I'm aware of the time. We've had a really good conversation. Certainly seen that there are, there's lots of good work going on out there, but there's clearly a lot of gaps, a lot of challenges, and we've spoken about some of them today, including the perception and stigma around the term mental health, the personal fears or reservations people might have about talking about it, especially in the workplace. So, but some really good things have come out, some signposting and apps and connections that hadn't happened before. So thank you all very much for your time. The next session is a Zoom focus group. So that was required separate registration on Zoom. So if you haven't done that already, please do go and register now. You can do that right up till the minute that the focus group starts. We'll have a few minutes break before that session. Thank you all very much for joining me, and I hope we can continue working together.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ian.
Thank you, Ian.
Cheers.